When we say that this is taxpayers' money, who essentially is that taxpayer? The big corporations are paying less tax. I, as a normal taxpayer, I am paying more to the government. While the expectation was that the corporations will now, or corporates will now spend more of the money that they will save in taxes.
And particularly the wealthy. It is no surprise that many have set up homes and businesses offshore, Dubai in particular, to really minimizing their own tax and payment. So the currency remains an issue, but you can work to India's advantage because it makes exports cheaper. The three biggest concerns were job creation, number one, number two, capital expenditure, and number three, exports.
How phone addiction could be a big problem for the Indian economy because it will create a sort of a unproductive lot of Indians, which will then reflect poorly on our economy.
There's no point having jobs out there which people can't fill. Every state in India is very friendly to business, and the competition between the states, which the government has encouraged, is very good.
The government has converted a document of vision called the Economic Survey into a moral science lesson.
Your tax rates are not competitive. You lose both the wealthy and the corporate.
The corporate tax is at par with the rest of the world. And even now the industry is not producing or not reinvesting into the country. Then what else can be done? Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket Upadhyay, on The Federal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news because news in India today needs not artificial but analytical intelligence. This is, of course, the budget week. The union government will present its budget. Budget is, as the word suggests, just a document which lays out where the government money or the taxpayers' money is going to be spent. But have you ever wondered who contributes to these taxes? When we say that this is taxpayers' money, who essentially is that taxpayer? For the past few years, we've been noticing a trend. And that trend is a constantly increasing rate of personal income tax contributing to the state exchequer. And in comparison, a slower than usual corporate tax rate or contribution to the state exchequer, which essentially means that more people, more individuals like you and me are contributing to the government than many big corporates. This despite the fact that they are making heaps of profits. And these corporates have been warned. They've been warned from time to time that they're not investing or reinvesting enough into the market. They have their own reasons. But why is it happening? Why has this started happening that the gap between personal income tax and corporation tax is now constantly increasing, where you are paying more tax than wealthy corporates? We speak to the past president of FICCI, Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, and try to ask this question of her and the many other things that surround the Indian economy and the union budget. All right, joining us right now is Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai. She's the chair of India Sanitation Coalition and the past president of FICCI. Thank you very much, Ms. Kidwai, for giving us time. Budget time is here, and that is when we remember you the most, apart from other days. Your expectations.
Reason to remember me more for some of the work I do in water and sanitation. Yeah.
Exactly. I must. And we should talk about that even now because I have a feeling this too has to do a lot with the economy or the state of the economy. Ms. Kidwai, first of all, an overview. Where do you think the economy is, the Indian economy? What do you expect from the budget? Your opening comments.
So I believe we are entering this next year with pretty strong macroeconomic fundamentals. Growth, which most projections are showing 7% for the forthcoming year. which is really not a bad rate at all. I mean, I'd love to say that we could be at 9 or 10 and maybe we get there, but the 7 is a good number. It's with a fiscal deficit glide path that is being met, so it's without overspending, with the 4.8 down to 4.4 well achieved. And I do believe that we've got a good story to tell despite the volatility and headwinds that come with tariffs, which have certainly impacted some key sectors in India, namely apparel, diamonds, leather, sadly very job-intensive sectors. But overall, the analysis shows that the impact of tariffs, even if they were to continue as is at the 50% level, including that 25% Russian oil addition that happened, that even if it was to continue, the impact on India's GDP would be somewhere between 0.4 to 0.8 if it were to continue over the years. And of course, there's an expectation that indeed there would be some rationalization of this in terms of an India-US FTA getting signed, but we have waited and waited for that. So the concerns really have been around our currency. The currency has, it's a chicken and egg situation, but as the currency depreciates, particularly the FII money, the foreign institutional investor money, flies away because they look at dollar returns. And the more it goes out, the less we see of those funds coming in, and therefore more pressure on the rupee. So that cycle is quite hard to break. But the view of the Reserve Bank of India has always been that they can't support the rupee for a very long period of time. But what they will and do try to do is to manage the volatility so that if it's a measured way going down, which also is very hard given that we get announcements from the US, the US president in particular, which are unanticipated. And it causes a lot of that volatility for the day. So quite hard to plan. So the currency remains an issue, but it can work to India's advantage because it makes exports cheaper. And our push for manufacturing has to be to get domestic demand up and therefore capex up, but also to get exports off the ground, where India's story has still been a very weak story. Although we've had great success now in electronics, and we've seen how the iPhone markets out of India have developed both for the domestic market, but also for exports. And if we can continue this push on exports, however selective it be, and our strength in services exports, I think we actually benefit from a depreciating rupee.
Ms. Kidwai, we heard the chief economic advisor present the economic survey and then also a press conference in which the economic survey says that the potential growth is now up to 7.5%. This is definitely more than the earlier estimate of 6.5%, which is a good sign. But the reasons why he feels that this growth can be achieved is the boost from manufacturing reforms, and land reforms would also be key to acceleration. I just wanted to know from you these growth figures. Many who are critics of this number, because they feel that this is not really a true reflection of the economy, they feel that the manner in which these numbers are presented are more romantic than one would imagine. Some even call it dicey.
So, I've obviously been quite interested in understanding what these discussions are about. And without being a statistician, it's, I think, the cause for concern is also how some of these bundlings that happen in order to create the GDP changing. And the argument being made is that it is being better aligned with the way many other countries do it. But what it does cause, therefore, is concern in terms of how do you compare a fresh bundle today with an older bundle tomorrow unless you also give us the figures as they may have looked in terms of the newer bundling that happens. So for this, we will have to rely on our experts to explain to us exactly what is happening. But I think anecdotal data, just the pulse of the nation, all suggests that there is optimism. In fact, a FICCI survey, which was done across 100 CEOs, shows a very high level of optimism around the 7% number being achieved. So in terms of the pulse of the nation, I think the mood is clearly up. And that should hopefully help us also achieve where we want to go. So interestingly, in the same survey, the three biggest concerns that, or indeed areas that CEOs would like the government to focus on were job creation, number one, number two, capital expenditure, and number three, exports. So if we look at how the messaging must happen through the budget, given that the finance minister does give a keen ear to what industries' requests and demands are, I think we should see focus on more job creation, which can happen whether it's manufacturing or services, or I would really like to believe the whole area of tourism, because that's such a big job creator and where India's really punching well below its weight. So to look at industries, to give focus to that jobs creation area, but equally as we look at job creation, there's the whole area of job skilling. So the skilling has to happen in terms of, there's no point having jobs out there which people can't fill. So what do those jobs look like? How do we provide that skilling? It's not about education and degrees alone, it is about the skills themselves. And some of the government programs like the apprentice programs, etc., that got announced in the last budget, which haven't quite taken off, may need some tweaking and sorting out as we take them going forward. So that on job creation. The second on capital expenditure, much needed, and government very disappointed that the private sector's capex has just not happened. Government itself has done very well in terms of infrastructure and capital expenditure as we see it. And the reason it doesn't happen from the private sector is demand, where companies' capacity utilization is below 75%, and which is the sort of levels we've been seeing. The need to expand capacity is not felt. And the sort of sweet point is at that 80-85% level. When companies begin to see their capacities filling up, then they begin to plan for that next wave of capital expenditure. And that can only happen through demand, domestic demand. And I think some of the GST breaks that got provided were very helpful. The income tax reductions, putting money in the hands of people always helps in terms of domestic consumption. And we saw rural consumption begin to come back as well. But equally, you fill capacity with exports. So the thrust and push on exports would therefore also be very important. And then the third area being exports themselves. So the capital expenditure export cycle becomes important. And looking at ways to encourage exports would be key for us as well.
You know, the second point that you mentioned, I actually had it in my list, but you gave an explanation. So let's just dwell on that a little. The chief economic advisor himself has requested and urged, and I would say even nudged India Inc. that we've reduced your corporate tax. You are doing well. There is profit also. Profits are soaring. At the same time, not enough investment is being made by these corporations in capacity expansion, which would then create more jobs. You say that the reason why this is happening is because there is no demand. I mean, you can't have a situation where you produce something with nowhere to go. Is that the only concern, and how will this be addressed?
So it is a major concern. I mean, why would you put new capacity if your old capacity is not full? So the only way is to utilize that capacity, right? To a lesser extent, if there are concerns about the ease of doing business and just the time it takes to get a new unit up, because acquisition of land and just organizing the various factors of production take time, then we could certainly look to reduce that. and to ease how you actually work on setting up a business and running a business. But I do think that's less a reason. There are some states that are very friendly. I would love to think that every state in India is very friendly to business, and the competition between the states, which the government has encouraged, is very good because it makes them compete to be more and more efficient. But the manufacturing story is still very checkered in India, where the concentration happens mainly actually in the southern states. So it would be good to see that being a lot more spread out. But other than that, I think demand and whether domestic or exports has got to be key. And the guidance from government through PLI schemes and all is helpful because it begins to encourage companies to look at areas they may not otherwise have looked at. So the push for semiconductors, the push for electronics, these are the push now for defense. These are all encouraging incentives that the government then gets industry to look at newer businesses. So then it's not about filling old capacity. It's about investing in new spaces, which are important for the country, but equally where companies are getting encouraged to look at new areas to invest. Defense has been a big one. We're seeing a lot of big companies and therefore MSMEs that are part of the supply chain begin to come forward because the story in India of just buying defense equipment from offshore is shifting to also manufacturing onshore. And so that becomes quite a new area. Not all companies want to be just a supplier to the Indian government, and so exports of those products also provides an avenue for us to increase our exports.
Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, I would like to draw your attention to the following statistics. So in the year between 2020 and 2023, we know that this was COVID time and the government made a change. It reduced corporate tax, which was seen as a big relief for corporations in this country, which were under the burden of very high taxation also. So there was a correction, if you were. Yeah. But as a consequence, while the expectation was that the corporations will now, or corporates will now spend more of the money that they will save in taxes, we saw that the personal income tax rate went higher and higher. For instance, in the year 2022-23, it was 10,22,325 crores of personal income tax, which has now increased to 11.56 thousand. And this is just going upwards and upwards, whereas the contribution of corporate tax is now, so you see the gap increasing, where personal income tax is more, corporate tax is less. What do you make of this? Because the word on the street is that the big corporations are paying less tax. I, as a normal taxpayer, I am paying more to the government.
So one is the marginal tax rate, where you're right, corporate tax rates are 25%, and the marginal tax rate at the personal level can be as high as 40+%, given all the surcharges that are there. And at the end of the day, Sanket, it's really about being competitive vis-a-vis the rest of the world. How do you get investment going in the country, whether by Indian business or by foreign companies that may be looking at the China Plus One story as we have hoped? And if surrounding countries, when you take Dubai as an instance, Vietnam, etc., where a lot of the investment is happening, even our corporate tax rate is high. So it is about the competition, and capital will go where it works best for them in terms of returns. So on the personal tax rate, equally, at the lower levels, sort of competitive with some of the countries, but our barriers or the levels at which the next level kicks in are very low. So again, and particularly the wealthy, it is no surprise that many have set up homes and businesses offshore, Dubai in particular, with a view to really minimizing their own tax and payment. So again, it's very important that while, of course, the country has to look at raising tax, the tax to GDP ratio at 6% is low. How else do we see and fund the growth of the country? So on the one hand, you need the tax, but on the other, if you don't encourage that investment and your tax rates are not competitive, you lose both the wealthy and the corporate who go to other spaces in order to minimize their tax, and therefore to maximize their returns. So we have to keep an eye on what those external rates look like. Comparing ourselves to the developed world, I mean, the tax rates, for example, in the Nordic countries, Stockholm, Norway, etc., are very high, much higher than ours, is not good enough, because in the countries where it's high, all the wealthy get covered for medical, for education that's free. It's the services that are provided and the quality of living and the government's own offerings back to its citizens is much higher than what we are providing. So all these factors have to be considered as we go ahead. But it's a tough balancing act for a government that may be very happy to reduce taxes, but then they also need that money to come in. And I think this is why GST played such a key role, because it captured a lot of money that was leaking out of the system. And thanks to the robustness of those GST returns, we have had the funds to provide for infrastructure, which has been such an important aspect of India's own growth story, because not only has it given us much needed infrastructure, but it helps industry enormously, where we have seen logistic costs come down. They are still not where they need to be. We still need to see maybe another 4 to 5% cost reduction in logistics, but it's certainly a lot better than it was a decade ago.
It's interesting you say that, because, if you juxtapose two things, number one, you say that the corporate tax is now low. Obviously, it is low compared to the 40-odd% to the 20-odd% now. So there is a reduction. And at that time, I clearly remember everybody said that now we seem to be at par with the global corporate tax rates.
Yeah.
But despite that, there were no investments and or capital expenditure, because you just now said there has to be demand. I can't just produce something and put in capital when I'm not utilizing my existing resources. I get that. But having said that, what else can be done? You see, if now the corporate tax is at par with the rest of the world, and even now the industry is not producing or not reinvesting into the country, then what else can be done?
So, demand, exports, to the extent that the Indian government is also playing with rates on imports, etc., in terms of feeding the domestic market. And that's what changed and is changing in electronics. I think the government made it well known to companies that if they wanted to access the domestic market, they needed to establish a base here. So that's good. I think we could do more in terms of encouraging Chinese companies to set up a base here, because the imports still continue, particularly in capital goods. Because Indian industries and industries actually around the world are very reliant now on Chinese equipment for manufacturing. But can we then encourage them to actually set up shop here, where we can actually control what's happening better than just the imports, and not be over-dependent on the geopolitics that can come in when we're just importing. And through all the scuffles we've had with China over the last 5-6 years on our borders, interestingly, trade with China has only gone up. So it tells you how dependent Indian business is for raw materials supply, for capital goods, etc. And by the way, visas are still an issue for technicians, but Indian industry is crying to get that same equipment they bought serviced by Chinese technicians. And luckily, some easing up there, but it's still not where it needs to be. So, that could be a whole area of Chinese investment. if you look at the just the last quarter, the last 2, 3 months, we have seen large investment in our banks. So just the pragmatism that RBI brought in terms of enabling foreign banks. So we've seen 2 large Japanese banks investing and an Emirates bank coming in at levels that offer large capital to our domestic banking industry. And it's not just about the capital. Having these banks here, they have customers and clients of theirs in their markets, which they then handhold into India. So they also become a catalyst for change. I mean, I know this from my days at HSBC. The number of foreign companies we handheld into their entries into India and ease their way here, help them understand India. So these are very important steps. And the pragmatism on RBI's side to allow them to come in with higher percentages than what they had earlier capped at, and to relook at voting rights and the time period at which they need to actually dilute down, etc., are all very important aspects of how you tackle concerns in important industries and enable that FDI to come in, because that's another way, obviously, of seeing investment in the country. So I think it's a mix of pragmatism, ease of doing business, and particularly on the way we regulate, and the regulation not so much at the center, but also the state levels, the Inspector Raj, or all of those issues which are not easy. Provide maybe a plug and play type of mechanism. In fact, one of the asks at FICCI was, why don't we set up a huge electronics park the way Shenzhen and Vietnam have, where the OEMs and the suppliers and all can be under one huge, large umbrella, where the ease of working together and, essentially to get that kind of landmass going is not easy. But if government provides it with all the electricity, water, and, effluent controls, everything in place, and people just pay a rental to come in and work together, follow the style of these large industrial parks abroad and work on that. And equally with SEZs, the concept of plug and play for exporting zones, where large SEZs have come up, but they're still not fully utilized. And there have been asks from these SEZs on where, while they're still building for the export, if they can use the capacities they've set up to also access the domestic market with paying back whatever the tax incentives were provided for export, but at least allow them to access the domestic market. So these are the tweakings that have to keep happening, even as policies we do in the right direction don't quite take off the way we want. So just being pragmatic along the way and tackling the problems one by one.
My final question, Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, this economic survey saw something very interesting. It found mention of ultra-processed food being a threat to the economy, how obesity is a big challenge to the economy, how phone addiction could be a big problem for the Indian economy because it will create a sort of a unproductive lot of Indians, which will then reflect poorly on our economy. It spoke extensively about behavioral changes. And many economists, they feel that the government has converted a document of vision called the Economic Survey into a moral science lesson. I want to know your views.
Well, look, I do believe that this demographic dividend, much hyped, much talked about, only works if we have productive workforces. And productive workforces must mean healthy workforces. So attending to the health of our citizens is very important. And it is no surprise that liquor and tobacco see the taxes they do across the world. It is with the desire to make it less accessible, more expensive, reduce utilization. I think what you're seeing through this document is putting processed foods in that same category to some extent. And I would think it's not a bad thing that we think twice before we drink that third bottle of carbonated beverage and live on processed foods at home. Is the price differential, which the budget being a financial document can impact taxes, right? So the tax and duties that are put on products it can be a disincentive as it makes it more expensive. So providing that guidance through the economic survey may give an indication that the budget may see the price points of some of these products go up from the desire of a government to ensure that its citizens think twice. You're not closing it out, but you maybe think twice in terms of doing things that affect your health and eat poorly. And frankly, it's all your the advertising that you see now against the gutkahs and all is all part of it. I work a lot in behavioral change and sanitation, and you can have toilets, which we have done so effectively as a country. We went from just 40% access to toilets to 98% access to toilets. But the utilization of the toilets, unless you keep reminding people why it's important for the health of their surroundings, that we be open defecation free, the toilets are there to be used, is all part of that behavior change. And it comes from creating a sanitary, healthy environment. So I do think we have to build that awareness. Maybe not enough to just raise the tax or have it, as you say, as a moral science lesson in the economic survey. But if that is indeed the mind of government, then actually educating people on eating healthy, working healthy, living healthy, keeping surroundings clean and sanitary are all really part of that behavioral change, because we do need a healthy nation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai. And I must mention, as you said at the very beginning also, your work as you were the past president of FICCI, definitely, but as the chair of the India Sanitation Coalition, we have done many programs in a previous company about the relation between economic growth and healthy habits.
Yeah.
For staying healthy, and how this healthy person will contribute in the betterment of the economy. So thank you very much for joining us.
I hope in your new incarnation you will continue that messaging. It's very important. And water and sanitation.
I absolutely will. I make that promise right away. Thank you.
Look forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
On that. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.